I knew my marriage was over the moment I saw the number at the bottom of the page. It wasn't the words that broke me first. It wasn't even my husband's signature. It was the number. A long row of zeros, typed neatly at the bottom of a document that looked more like a business deal than anything that should have had my life attached to it. I was standing in my father-in-law's study when I found it. The room smelled like lemon polish and old paper. The same way it had smelled every Thanksgiving for the past 9 years. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall blinds, catching dust in the air, quiet and slow, like time had decided to move gently while my heart forgot how to beat. I hadn't gone in there looking for anything. I was just looking for a pen. That's the part that still makes me shake my head. A pen. Before all of this, my life was ordinary in the way you only appreciate after it's gone. Mornings in our house were always loud. The kettle would whistle while the kids argued about cereal. Emma liked the chocolate one with the little marshmallows. Noah insisted on the plain flakes like an old man in a 7-year-old's body. I'd move between them, tying shoelaces, wiping milk from chins, packing lunches that always came back half-eaten. Daniel, my husband, used to stand by the counter with his coffee, scrolling through his phone. He'd kiss the top of my head without looking up. Busy day? I'd ask. Always, he'd say. That was his favorite word that last year. Always. Always busy. Always tired. Always we'll talk later. I thought it was stress. His father had recently stepped back into the company and things were tense. Daniel worked for him, had since his 20s, and their relationship was complicated in the quiet, stiff way of men who don't know how to talk without pride getting in the way. My father-in-law, Richard, was the kind of man who believed money solved everything. Problems, arguments, loyalty. He had a voice like gravel wrapped in silk, smooth, but heavy. When he entered a room, conversations adjusted themselves around him. He'd never liked that I handled our household finances. He'd say it jokingly. Careful, Daniel. He'd chuckle at dinner. She's got you on an allowance. Everyone would laugh. I would too. But his eyes never did. The first change I noticed in Daniel wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost polite. He stopped telling me things. Not big things. Just life things. I'd hear about meetings from his mother before I heard about them from him. He started taking calls outside. He'd sit in the car for an extra few minutes after getting home, staring ahead like he was bracing himself. One night, while folding laundry, I said, "Are we okay?" He didn't look up from his laptop. Of course. Why wouldn't we be? I watched his hands. His fingers were tapping, restless. You feel far away, I said softly. I'm just stressed, he replied. Dad's been on me about performance. It's nothing to do with us. But us had started to feel like a piece of furniture. Still there. Just not touched. The day I found the contract, we were at Richard's house for Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, overcooked green beans, the same oval dining table that had seen every birthday and quiet argument of the past decade. Emma spilled her juice. Noah knocked over his chair. Daniel laughed too loudly at something his father said. Everything looked normal. It felt like walking through a house where the walls had already started cracking, but no one else could see it yet. After dessert, Richard asked Daniel to help him in the garage. My mother-in-law went upstairs to lie down with a headache. The kids were in the living room watching a cartoon, their giggles drifting down the hall. I went toward the study to find a pen so Emma could draw. Richard's study was always off limits in a polite, unspoken way. But I'd been in there before, dropping off coffee, grabbing envelopes. It wasn't forbidden, just respected. His desk was wide and dark, papers stacked in precise piles. A silver pen holder sat near the edge, but it was empty. I opened the top drawer carefully. Receipts, business cards, a leather checkbook, and a manila folder, slightly thicker than the rest. My name caught my eye first. Not written. Typed. Marital dissolution agreement. I told myself not to open it. I opened it anyway. The words blurred at first. Legal language always did that, turned emotions into paragraphs. But certain phrases punched through. Custodial transfer. Primary guardianship to be assumed by paternal grandfather pending final decree. Financial consideration to spouse for cooperation. Spouse. That was Daniel. I turned the page. There it was. A payment schedule. Lump sums. Conditions. And at the bottom, 2 signatures. Richard's. And Daniel's. My thumb was pressed against the paper so hard it left a faint crescent of sweat. My ears rang, like I'd stood up too fast. They weren't planning a divorce. They were planning to take my children. And someone had decided my motherhood had a price. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I slid the papers back into the folder, my hands moving on instinct, not thought. Closed the drawer. Stood up straight. By the time Daniel walked past the door, smiling faintly at something his father said, I was already different. He just didn't know it yet. I don't remember the drive home that night. I remember the streetlights passing like slow blinks. I remember Emma's head tipped against the car window, her breath fogging a soft circle on the glass. Noah snored lightly, one sneaker still half off his foot. Daniel drove. His hands were steady on the wheel. I kept staring at them. Those hands had held our newborn daughter, trembling with awe. Those hands had brushed hair from my face when I cried the night my mother passed. Those same hands had signed a contract that priced my children like assets. Did you have a nice time? He asked, eyes still on the road. My voice came from somewhere far away. Hum. He nodded, satisfied with the smallness of it. I turned my face toward the window so he wouldn't see the way my jaw trembled. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, the way I do when I'm trying not to cry in front of the kids. I didn't say anything, because the moment I did, everything would explode. And I needed time. That night, I lay awake beside him. Daniel fell asleep quickly, like he always did. One arm flung over his head, breath deep and even. I watched the ceiling fan turn slow circles, the shadows moving like quiet thoughts. My mind kept returning to one line in the document. Primary guardianship to be assumed by paternal grandfather pending final decree. Pending. They hadn't done it yet. Which meant they were still planning. Which meant I wasn't too late. The house creaked softly around me. The fridge hummed. Somewhere down the hall, Emma coughed in her sleep. I slid out of bed and walked to the kids' room. The hallway carpet was cool under my feet. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Noah had kicked his blanket off. Emma had one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit. Their faces were loose with sleep, unaware that someone had already tried to redraw the shape of their lives without asking them. I've got you, I whispered. Not loudly, just enough for me. The next morning, I made pancakes. Not because I wanted to, because routine is a lifeline when your world is tilting. The smell of butter and syrup filled the kitchen. Daniel kissed my cheek. Someone's in a good mood, he said, surprised. I just didn't sleep well, I replied lightly. Figured sugar would help. He smiled, relieved by normalcy. That's when I understood something that hurt in a different way. He thought I didn't know. He thought he was ahead of me. After the school drop-off, I didn't go home. I drove to a small office building near downtown, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, watching people come and go with coffee cups and briefcases, living regular Tuesdays. Then I walked inside and asked the receptionist, "Is Ms. Alvarez available?" Carla Alvarez had helped my sister through a custody mess years ago. I remembered 2 things about her. She listened more than she talked, and judges took her seriously. She saw me within the hour. Her office smelled like paper and peppermint tea. Law books lined the shelves, heavy and certain. I sat across from her, the contract photocopy shaking in my hands. I had gone back to Richard's study early that morning, before anyone woke, pretending I'd left my phone charger. I'd taken pictures of every page. Carla read in silence. Her expression didn't change, but her pen started moving, making small notes in the margins. When she finished, she looked at me for a long moment. "Did your husband present this to you?" she asked. "No." "Have you been served any custody filings?" "No." She nodded once. "Then this is an agreement between 2 men about children who are not legally theirs to bargain." My breath left me in a slow, shaky stream. "So they can't just take them?" "Not without due process," she said calmly. "And this," she tapped the paper. "This looks like coercion tied to divorce terms. Judges don't like that. Especially not when it concerns custody." I swallowed. "He thinks I'm unfit." "Are you?" The question wasn't cruel. It was direct. I thought of packed lunches, doctor appointments, bedtime stories, parent-teacher meetings I attended alone because Daniel was always busy. I'm their mother, I said quietly. Carla's eyes softened, just slightly. Good. Then we prepare. Prepare for what? For the moment they make a move. That afternoon, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Daniel took a call in the backyard, his voice low. I cracked the kitchen window just enough to hear pieces. Yes, I'll talk to her soon. No, she doesn't suspect. My chest tightened, but I kept chopping carrots for dinner, the knife hitting the board in steady, careful thuds. At dinner, he barely touched his food. Dad thinks it's best if the kids spend more time at their house, he said casually, not meeting my eyes. Stability, you know? I smiled, the way you do when you're pretending not to hear the warning under the words. They already see them every week, I said. What's unstable? He shrugged. Just a thought. A thought. Written in ink. Signed. Funded. I tucked that word away like evidence. That night, I started a folder of my own. School records. Medical records. Photos of scraped knees I'd bandaged. Science projects we'd built at the kitchen table. Emails from teachers thanking me for volunteering. Proof of a life I'd lived every day. Even when no one was watching. If they wanted to turn my motherhood into paperwork, I could play that game too. But I wasn't playing to win against them. I was playing to protect my children from becoming a transaction. And for the first time since I found that contract, the fear inside me shifted. It didn't leave. It hardened into something steadier. Resolve. The strange thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it sits across from you at breakfast, asks you to pass the salt, and thanks you for the coffee. The week after I met with Carla, I watched my husband like I was studying a stranger on a train. Familiar face, unknown destination. Daniel started coming home earlier. That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like performance. He helped Noah with math homework one evening, his voice overly patient. He offered to take Emma to dance class on Saturday, something he'd claimed he was too swamped to do for months. I stood in the hallway, listening to him laugh with them, and felt grief twist in my chest. He wasn't becoming a better father. He was building a case. On Thursday night, he brought up counseling. We've been distant, he said, folding his napkin carefully. Maybe we should talk to someone. For the kids. The kids. I met his eyes. You think we're that bad? No, he said quickly. I just want a record that we tried. A record. There it was again. Paper. Documentation. Trails. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded, relieved I hadn't argued. He still thought I was one step behind. Saturday afternoon, while the kids were at a birthday party, I went back to Richard's house. My hands trembled as I knocked. I hadn't told Daniel I was coming. My mother-in-law opened the door surprised. Oh, I didn't know you were stopping by. I just needed to return a dish. I lied gently, holding an empty casserole pan. She let me in, distracted by a pot boiling over in the kitchen. Richard was in the study. Of course he was. The door was half open. He sat behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, reading. For a second, I saw him the way I used to, the man who'd taught Noah how to ride a bike, who'd brought Emma a stuffed bear from a business trip. Then I saw the folder in my mind. Richard, I said, stepping inside. He looked up, mildly surprised. You need something? I closed the door behind me. Yes, I said. My voice sounded calm. I was proud of that. I need to understand why you think you can buy my children. Silence filled the room like smoke. His expression didn't change at first. Then his jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. I walked to the desk and set my phone down. The screen lit up with a photo of the contract. Ido. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. No epaleji. No sok. Just calculation. You went through my things, he said coolly. You went through my life, I replied. He leaned back in his chair. This isn't about you being a bad mother. It's about stability. Daniel's career is demanding. You've never understood the pressure he's under. I understand perfectly, I said. I live with the consequences of it every day. You're emotional, he continued. as if explaining something to a boardroom. The kids need structure. Resources. Our family can provide that. They already have a family, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. Me. He sighed like I was being difficult. This doesn't have to be ugly. There was compensation arranged. You could start over comfortably. Comfortably. As if my children were furniture I could replace. Does your wife know? I asked quietly. A flicker. Small but there. That's not relevant. It will be, I said. For the first time his eyes sharpened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said, picking up my phone. You did that when you decided motherhood was negotiable. I walked out before my voice could shake again. That evening, Daniel was waiting in the kitchen when I got home. His face was pale. Dad said you stopped by. Yes. What did you say? The truth, I replied, setting my purse down. He rubbed his face with both hands. You weren't supposed to find out like this. I laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound. Like what? Like I tripped over the paperwork to give away my kids. It's not like that, he said, his voice cracking. He thinks you're overwhelmed. That you'd be happier without all this responsibility. Do I look unhappy with my children? I asked. No, but what? He offered to help, Daniel said, the words tumbling out. Money. A house. You could go back to school, travel. And you? I whispered. What did he offer you? He looked away. That was my answer. How much? I asked. Please don't do this. How much, Daniel? He swallowed. Enough to fix everything. Everything. Except the part where he'd have to look his kids in the eyes one day. I married you, I said softly. Not your father. I was trying to make it easier, he said, tears in his eyes now. For everyone. You made it cheaper, I replied. He slept on the couch that night. I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep, the house quiet except for the ticking clock, and sent Carla one message. They've admitted it. Her reply came minutes later. Good. Now we move. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to certainty. They thought the contract was leverage. They didn't realize it was evidence. The house felt different after that night. Not louder. Not quieter. Just divided. Daniel moved through the rooms like a guest who had overstayed. He made coffee but didn't ask if I wanted any. He folded laundry but left my pile untouched, as if touching my clothes required permission. We were polite. Polite is colder than anger. On Monday morning, I served oatmeal. The kids argued about raisins. Daniel cleared his throat. I think we should tell them we're having some problems, he said carefully. Emma looked up. Like what kind of problems? The grown-up kind, he answered, forcing a smile. I set Noah's bowl in front of him. We're working through some things, I said calmly. But you are safe. And loved. That part doesn't change. Daniel glanced at me, surprised at my steadiness. What he didn't understand yet was this. Fear had already burned through me. What was left was clarity. That afternoon, I met Carla again. She spread documents across her desk, organized and precise. I've filed a motion requesting full temporary custody, she said. Given the coercive nature of that agreement, the court will want to review it quickly. My heart thudded. Temporary. It protects you until everything is sorted out, she explained. It also prevents any sudden transfers of the children. I nodded. We'll also subpoena financial records, she continued. If your father-in-law transferred funds tied to that agreement, it strengthens the coercion argument. I thought of Richard's calm expression in his study. He believed money was invisible, but money leaves trails. And Daniel? I asked. She paused. He'll have to choose whether he stands by his father or his children. I stared at the grain of her wooden desk. I already knew which way he'd leaned. 2 days later, Daniel was served at work. He came home early, papers in his hand, face flushed with humiliation. You went to court? He demanded, closing the door harder than necessary. You went to my father, I replied quietly. This could have been handled privately. You handled it privately, I said. Without me. He paced the living room. Dad is furious. Good, I said. He stopped. You don't understand what you're doing. He'll fight this. I hope he does, I answered, because I want a judge to hear exactly how much I'm worth to him. Daniel's shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like the young man I'd married. Unsure, caught between loyalty and fear. I didn't think it would go this far, he whispered. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think. The first hearing was scheduled for the following week. Word traveled faster than I expected. My mother-in-law called, her voice trembling. Richard says you're accusing him of bribery. I'm stating facts, I said gently. He was only trying to protect the children. From what? I asked. She had no answer. Later that evening, Emma came into my room holding her stuffed rabbit. Are we moving? She asked. I pulled her into my lap. She smelled like strawberry shampoo. No, I said firmly. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. She studied my face carefully, as if checking for cracks. Children always know more than we think. Okay, she whispered, and rested her head against my chest. I held her tighter than usual. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The air smelled faintly of paper and something metallic. Daniel sat at one table with his father and their attorney, a tall man with silver hair and a confident posture. He sat beside Kale. I kept my hands folded in my lap, so no one could see them tremble. When the contract was presented, a quiet shift moved through the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, reading. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said to Richard. Is this your signature? Yes, Your Honor. And you intended to assume primary guardianship of your grandchildren? Temporarily, he said smoothly. Until my son's marital situation stabilized. With financial incentive offered to the children's mother? Richard hesitated. That was a settlement provision. The judge's gaze sharpened. A settlement she had not agreed to. Silence. Daniel stared at the table. I watched his profile, wondering if he felt shame or just regret at being exposed. Carla stood. Your Honor, the petitioner was unaware of this agreement. It demonstrates clear intent to interfere with her parental rights. The judge nodded slowly. Temporary full custody is granted to the mother pending further investigation, he said firmly. No changes to the children's residence without court approval. The sound of the gavel wasn't loud, but it echoed in my bones. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There were no cameras. Just us. Richard walked past me without speaking. His jaw was tight, pride wounded but not broken. Daniel lingered. I never wanted this to be public, he said quietly. Neither did I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it. He hadn't expected me to fight. He had expected me to fold. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. You start by telling the truth, I said. Not to me, to yourself. He didn't answer. Because the truth is heavy, and not everyone is strong enough to carry it. That night, I tucked the kids into bed with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. The court had spoken. But this wasn't over. Richard still had money. Daniel still had doubt. And I still had something they underestimated. Proof. Victory doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like sitting alone in your kitchen at midnight, staring at a stack of papers, and realizing the war has only shifted shape. The temporary custody order protected my children. But it didn't end the marriage. And it didn't stop Richard. 2 days after the hearing, Daniel moved out. He didn't pack angrily. He folded his clothes carefully into a suitcase while the kids were at school. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched him remove pieces of himself from the drawers we once shared. I'll stay at my parents' place for now, he said quietly. I nodded. There were 1,000 things I could have asked. Do you love me? Was I ever enough? When did you decide I was disposable? But none of them would change the path he'd already chosen. Before he left, he paused near the door. I never thought Dad would actually lose in court, he admitted. I met his eyes. That's because you've never seen him lose. He swallowed, then walked out. The click of the door shutting behind him sounded final in a way I hadn't expected. The children handled it better than I feared. Emma asked if Daddy was in trouble. Noah wanted to know if he'd still come to soccer games. Yes, I told them both. Your dad still loves you. That part at least I believed. Love and courage are not the same thing. I was learning that slowly. Richard didn't contact me directly after the hearing. Instead, letters began arriving from his attorney. Requests for mediation. Claims that I was escalating matters unnecessarily. Subtle suggestions that I was emotionally unstable for dragging the family into court. Emotionally unstable. I almost laughed when I read that line. Carla did laugh. They're pivoting, she said, flipping through the documents. When the money trail becomes inconvenient, they attack credibility. I expected that, I replied. And I had. Because in the weeks after finding the contract, I hadn't just gathered school records and medical forms. I'd gathered something else. Emails. Messages. Bank statements. The day after my confrontation in Richard's study, Daniel had sent his father a text from our shared tablet, the one synced to our home account. He must have forgotten. I'm worried she'll fight this harder than we thought. Richard's reply had come minutes later. That's what the additional transfer is for. Once she sees the numbers, she'll cooperate. An additional transfer. I found it in their financial records, a large deposit into Daniel's personal account, labeled as a consulting bonus. The timing aligned perfectly with the date on the contract. Carla's eyes had lit up when I showed her. That, she said softly, is not consulting. Mediation was scheduled for the following month. It was held in a quiet conference room with a long oak table and a pitcher of water no one touched. Richard sat at one end, immaculate as always. Daniel beside him, thinner now, eyes shadowed. I sat opposite them with Carla. The mediator, a gray-haired woman with kind but firm eyes, began calmly. The goal today is resolution. Richard folded his hands. We want what's best for the children. I almost admired his consistency. Carla slid copies of the financial transfers across the table. And we want transparency, she said. Daniel stiffened when he saw the documents. Richard's expression changed, not dramatically but enough. What is this? He asked. You tell me, I replied quietly. Silence settled like dust. The mediator cleared her throat. These appear to be substantial transfers made in proximity to the proposed custodial agreement. Richard leaned back. Daniel is compensated for his work. For selling access to his children? I asked, my voice steady. Daniel's face flushed. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I asked him directly. For the first time since this began, he looked at me without defensiveness. It was pressure, he said softly. Dad said if we divorced cleanly, he'd secure my position in the company, that he'd make sure the kids never wanted for anything. And what did he say about me? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Tell her, Richard said sharply. Daniel's voice dropped. He said you were unpredictable, that you'd make things messy, that stability meant removing the variable. The variable. I let the word sit there. I'm not a math problem, I said quietly. I'm their mother. The mediator interjected gently. Given the financial evidence, continuing litigation may not reflect favorably in court. That was the first crack in Richard's armor. He valued reputation above everything. A public trial exposing attempted coercion? That would stain more than pride. What do you want? He asked me finally. Not Carla. Me. I met his gaze evenly. I want my children left out of your negotiations. I want no interference in custody beyond what the court deems appropriate. And I want acknowledgement that what you attempted was wrong. He scoffed lightly. You want an apology? I want accountability. Daniel exhaled slowly. And then something unexpected happened. He spoke before his father could. She's right, he said quietly. Richard turned toward him, stunned. I should never have signed it, Daniel continued. I was afraid of disappointing you. I thought if I handled it your way, everything would stay controlled. And now? Richard asked coldly. Daniel's eyes moved to me. Now I see what I almost lost. For a moment no one spoke. The mediator cleared her throat again. Perhaps we can draft terms reflecting cooperative co-parenting without financial contingencies. Richard's jaw tightened. But he nodded. Because money could buy silence. It couldn't buy victory this time. When we left the building, Daniel walked beside me toward the parking lot. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I'm not offering it yet," I replied honestly. He nodded. "I resigned from the company." I stopped walking. "You did." He nodded once. "I can't work for him after this." For the first time in months, I saw something in him that resembled independence. It didn't fix us. But it mattered. Life didn't snap back into place after mediation. It shifted. Like furniture in a room you've lived in for years. Familiar, but you still bump into corners. Daniel rented a small apartment across town. The kids stayed with me during the week and spent Saturdays with him. Court orders turned our family into a schedule, measured in pickup times and shared calendars. The first Saturday he took them, the house felt hollow. No cartoons humming in the background. No socks abandoned on the couch. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock. Louder than I'd ever noticed before. I stood in Emma's doorway for a long time, staring at her unmade bed. Her stuffed rabbit was missing, she'd taken it with her. That comforted me. She still needed something soft to sleep with. Children don't detach as easily as adults pretend to. A week later, the final hearing date was set. Carla prepared me for every possibility, but her confidence had grown. "The financial coercion is clear," she said. "Your father-in-law will likely push for settlement terms before trial." "He already did," I replied. She smiled faintly. "He's not used to resistance." Neither was Daniel. Richard requested a private meeting before the hearing. I almost refused. But Carla advised, "Let him talk. Information is power." We met in her office. Richard looked older than I remembered. Not physically. His suit was still crisp, his posture straight, but there was strain in the set of his jaw. "I underestimated you," he said without greeting. "I know," I replied. He nodded once, accepting that. "This has gone further than intended. That's what happens when you try to control people instead of respecting them." He exhaled through his nose. "I built everything from nothing. I protect what's mine." "Your grandchildren aren't possessions," I said. "They're my blood. And they're my children." The room felt small, heavy with years of unspoken tension. "I can offer a settlement," he said finally. "No more custody disputes. Educational trust funds. Financial security for them." "For them?" I repeated. "Yes." "And what's the condition?" He hesitated. There it was again, the instinct to attach a string. "No condition," he said at last. Carla watched him closely. "You understand this does not absolve prior actions." Richard nodded stiffly. "I understand." For the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in him. Not power. Fatigue. Maybe finally he'd realized money couldn't rewrite this story. The final hearing was quieter than the first. Less drama. More resolution. The judge reviewed the settlement terms, the financial disclosures, the communication records. Daniel testified briefly, acknowledging his role, and withdrawing any request for custody modification. Richard did not testify. The order was clear. Primary custody remained with me. Shared parenting time with Daniel under standard guidelines. No third-party interference without court approval. It was official. My children were not up for negotiation. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like rain. Daniel stood beside me under the overhang. "I'm sorry," he said again, softer this time. Not defensive. Not panicked. Just human. "I believe you," I said. That surprised him. "But believing you doesn't mean forgetting," I added gently. "I know." We stood in silence, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and briefcases, each carrying battles no one else could see. "I'm going to therapy," he said after a moment. "I need to understand why I let him decide everything." "That's a good place to start," I replied. Healing doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it just means growing separately instead of breaking each other further. Months passed. The house slowly felt like home again. I painted the living room a soft warm beige. Emma helped, leaving tiny roller marks near the baseboards. Noah planted tomatoes in the backyard, checking them every morning like they might grow faster if he stared hard enough. We built new routines. Friday movie nights. Pancakes shaped like animals. Quiet talks at bedtime where the kids asked fewer worried questions and more ordinary ones. Daniel showed up consistently. Not perfectly, but present. Richard stayed distant. But one afternoon, a package arrived, a set of children's books with a short note. For Emma and Noah. No expectations. Grandpa. I stared at the handwriting for a long time. Then I put the books on the shelf. Forgiveness is not a door you fling open. It's a window you crack slowly, when the air feels safe. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the back steps with a mug of tea. The night smelled like damp earth and cut grass. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then settled. I thought about the woman I was the day I opened that drawer. Scared. Shaking. Certain she was about to lose everything. She didn't know yet that strength doesn't always feel like power. Sometimes it feels like staying calm when you have every right to scream. Sometimes it feels like paperwork. Sometimes it feels like choosing dignity when someone tries to reduce you to a number. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't humiliate anyone. I just refused to disappear. And that was enough. If you had asked me a year ago what betrayal looked like, I would have said something loud. A slammed door. A shouted confession. A suitcase thrown down the stairs. But betrayal can also look like a neat stack of papers in a quiet study. Like a signature written calmly at the bottom of a page. Like someone deciding your worth in numbers instead of words. What hurt the most wasn't the money. It was the assumption. The belief that I would trade my children for comfort. That I would shrink quietly if the offer was large enough. That I was a variable to be removed. For a long time, I replayed that moment in my head. The drawer sliding open, the folder in my hands, the way my name looked typed in cold black ink. And I realized something important. They didn't fail because they underestimated the law. They failed because they underestimated me. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits at a kitchen table at midnight, organizing school records. Sometimes it makes phone calls instead of scenes. Sometimes it keeps its voice steady while everything inside is shaking. I won't pretend this story has a perfect ending. My marriage changed forever. Trust, once cracked, never looks the same. Daniel and I are still learning how to be parents together without being partners. Some days are easier than others. And Richard, he is still a proud man. But now he knows something he didn't before. Love cannot be negotiated. What I gained wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I know now that dignity is louder than anger. That patience can outlast power. And that motherhood is not something anyone gets to buy. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent? Would you have confronted them immediately? Or would you have done what I did? Gather the truth quietly and let it speak for you? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or someone you love, consider subscribing and supporting the channel. Because sometimes sharing our stories is how we remind each other. We are not variables. We are not negotiable. And we are stronger than they think.